I just finished listening to another radio show, and this one had a Lyran, Pleiadian, whatever, talking, and they got to talking a little bit about history they remember. And what you see in the background back there is how I'm looking up the Orion Wars, because it's like the Orion Wars. I haven't gotten very far, because, you know how I am about that. But, it was asked, as the Pleiadian, who do you run from? And the answer was the Draconians and the Anunnaki. The history of when what I consider the Pleiadian Empire, the Great Country, whatever you want to call it, this person began listing that, and they started talking about how we had to make weapons to defend ourselves, and how they were driven out of the borders. Then he said the center, the home, the ground zero, whatever, was never gotten to, and I was like, really? So I have told this story many, many, many times over the years. I actually have had people would talk to me in private to get the story and then publicly claim it as their own story, which pisses me the fuck off. So I'm going to tell you now what I remember, what I have always remembered since I was around 12 to 14 years old, somewhere around in there. I don't share the story anymore because of the people who have stolen my history, which is basically identity theft in my opinion. For example, I once told somebody about how my father was born with a double veil, and this person within 24 hours was on this list that we were both a member on, claiming my story, and it's just like I have always called where I'm from Shiro. It wasn't until later that I learned that people call it Lyra. I always called the home world Shiro, and I didn't really mean the home world. I meant the valley in which the castle stood. And I don't really mean a castle like a Cinderella castle. You know, I also call that castle the anthill. And I call it the anthill because a lot of people, it's convoluted, I know. Alright, so let me start over. Once upon a time, many eons ago, there was this little planet, and it was blue, kind of, and I don't remember the planet's name. I'm told it was Lyra. And on that planet was the capital seat. And at the capital seat was a valley. And in that valley, there was a structure in which the High Mucky Mucks lived. I call that structure the anthill. I call it the anthill because it was kind of anthill shaped. It was naturally formed out of a type of marble, a crystal marble that reflects pink in the sun. And it had lots of little burrow holes, just like a certain type of anthill. And underneath the anthill, because these people had a perfect relationship with the other denizen of the planet, were I can only describe them as dragon caves. And I don't mean like a dragon, like Pete's dragon or Dragon of the George. I mean they were dragons, you know, they were big and they had wings and kind of a feathery fur and like to throw you off cliffs when you're trying to learn how to fly. They had a very hierarchical clan structure. They did not call each other names the way you do. You would call them things like the queen from the neighboring colony. By the way, there was indeed a dragoness named the queen from the neighboring colony. That's what you called her, and she was so red she was black. And this perfect utopia is when I lived. And it was at a time in which there was some political upheaval, and there was some problems on the border. We were having problems with getting attacked. We also had some internal upheaval that I barely remember. People were not happy. Nobody really liked the current leader, who, by the way, had red and yellow hair, kind of like a tiger lily. And one day, somehow, the enemy, whom I've always called the black-shelled beasts, their vehicles were black. and I mean black, like an absence of light black. Their armor was black, and they were quick, and they were merciless. They found the capital seat, and it was a surprise attack. It came out of nowhere, and I just happened to be in the fields that day hanging out, because I was a kid, you see, and came running home just in time to see my mother shot in the back in one of the ships, and her blood sprayed on my little shoes, my little satin blue whatever shoes. And so a friend of mine grabbed my hand and got me out of there. We ran off, hid in the bushes, and then climbed up the mountains, because remember, this is a valley. And from a high-ish standpoint, because I guess the attackers were just that cocky, they didn't think to check. But anyway, we stood and watched people rounded up to be sold into slavery and carted off in cargo ships. And that is my memory of Shiro, or Shiro, or whatever you want to say. I don't share this memory these days for a couple of reasons. One, the identity theft that I have mentioned, but two, because of media, the media corruption thing that I covered in a previous video. How do I know I didn't get this in Battlestar Galactica? I don't. But this is something I've carried inside of me most of my life. And whenever I hear someone saying, well, that didn't happen, that really bothers me, because it's like, no, I've carried this memory. I've carried these details, the scent of the flowers that day, the wheat grasses and how tall they were, the shimmer of the pink of the stone in the morning when the sun was rising above the mountains around, the fauna, and how the fauna actually had a blue tint. I've actually long suspected that Kentucky bluegrass was somehow kin to the fauna there, because a lot of the fauna was bluish. I remember a deer-like creature, and you know, I don't know if I had one as a pet or whatever, but there seems to have been one that was largely a large part of my life. I remember a cave that I ended up living in for quite some time after that attack, and other people that I have spoken with have remembered that cave independently, incidentally, and known about that cave without me having to tell them that part. That used to be a secretive part I would keep very much to myself. I remember what's in the cave. I had a out-of-body experience in which a astral entity carried me home, and I actually walked back into the castle and got to see how things were doing there, and that was an interesting experience. The thing about relying completely on the memory of these things is their memories, and we don't know what's made up, what's colored, what's changed, what's real, what's not, what our minds are trying to filter. It's kind of like when the European ships first came over to America, the natives described them to each other as strange clouds, quote unquote, because that was how they had to describe it. So we don't know how our mind is filtering it in these bodies and after all this time. But I do know that if my memory is correct, and I'm willing to accept it may not be, just outright telling me I'm wrong isn't going to be acceptable. Sorry. Yeah, that would be like telling me that I don't really know what my name is, or, oh, I don't know, that I was wrong and the sky really wasn't blue today, okay? You're going to have to do more than just tell me I'm wrong. But I accept that my memories might be colored, and so I'm not going to go shoving it on other people. I also know from what other people have said that are connected to this particular dynasty that a lot of the old information from my time has been lost. And so we have these histories that were written later, and I often wonder if those histories aren't written by, you know, written wrong, much like a lot of our modern day human history is often having to be corrected if it's not similar to that. And it isn't that people are lying to each other on purpose or whatever the way it might be, so much as just sometimes things get written wrong. But anyway, that's a Lyra memory. Sure, I can tell you other things about the culture, but This has gotten too long, so I'm going to go now. Bye-bye.